Good morning. I'm Pablo Willie Bustos. I'm the music director here. I use he and him pronouns. And up there we have some members of the choir that will be joining me today for some music. Let's start with a song today to help us arrive in our bodies. Please rise in body or spirit and join me in singing Gather the Spirit. Lyrics will be up here. And also, if you'd like to use a great hymnal, it's number 347.
Welcome. Bienvenidos. Awesome. I'm Shannon Foose. I'm your membership and pastoral care coordinator here. I use the pronouns she and ella. I'm so happy you're with us here this morning. Our mission here at First Unitarian Church is through spiritual connection and community. We listen deeply to others and ourselves. We open to wonder and transformation, and we serve with love and humility. We honor with respect the Seneca Nation, keepers of the Western Door, part of the Haudenosaunee, on whose ancestral lands First Unitarian now stands. If you are here for the first time or one of your first times and you haven't stopped by our wonderful welcome desk to get a name tag, to get our newsletter, please remember to do that after service. And if you are here because you are having a tough time and you need someone to speak to, we have a chaplain in the back, and we also have a chat chaplain for those of you online. Let us all take a deep breath as we settle into this space and time. We are going to light the chalice. Brownlee's going to do that here. If you are online, get your handy chalice out and you can light it with us. Join with me in saying our chalice lighting words. Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and mysteries of this great gift.
Good morning. My name's Brownlee Field. I use he, him, and his pronouns. I spent a long, cold, and very snowy winter in Mattoon, Illinois when I was in college. I was a co-op student, and one of my work assignments was at the General Electric photo lamp plant in Mattoon. Now, Mattoon is a little town that's on the interstate going north into Chicago, right in the middle of Illinois. Not much else around it. And the folks that are residents of Mattoon and work at the plant, have roots there in the town. And I did not. I didn't know anybody at the plant, didn't know anybody in the town. Now, I was my work assignment leader, I guess, an engineer, middle-aged engineer, became my mentor and led me around the plant, showed me all the different things, told me what I should be doing, and helped me get acquainted with the town. And that was kind of the first step in making me feel welcome in this little town that I was not familiar with. Then they set it up so that I could live or share an apartment with a young intern minister at the Presbyterian Church. And so I didn't have to live alone in the middle of winter, and it was kind of like the second step of helping me feel welcomed. Now, the technicians and the engineers in the engineering office would routinely go to a bar after work on Fridays, and they invited me to come along, and that's where I learned how to play foosball. That's one of those important life skills, right? How to play foosball. So, they went out of their way to help me feel welcomed and included me in their social group. At least they did on Fridays. And then outside the gates of the plant, there was kind of a Mexican restaurant that was popular with all the folks that worked there, and I often went there with folks from the plant, and that's where I learned about green chili, and I still like green chili, I guess. And finally, my roommate, the intern minister, didn't want me sitting alone in our apartment on Saturday night, so he invited me to come help with his youth group at church. And so I did that and helped be the DJ for their church dances. And I'm sure we were doing disco tunes at the time because Saturday Night Fever was the movie that was in the one movie house in the middle of Mattoon. Now, the folks in Mattoon, they all knew one another, but they went out of their way to make me feel welcome. I was an outsider, I was temporary, I was just an engineering student, but they went out of their way to make me feel welcome. And isn't that why we come to church? Because here, it's in our nature to be welcoming, to we welcome others that are quite different from ourselves. We're a welcoming congregation, and if you're new or newish here, I hope you have felt welcomed or feel welcomed coming here. And if you've been here for a while and this is, this church is your home, I hope you routinely reach out and welcome others that are new or that you don't know. And this is our time of greeting. So I would invite you now to greet your neighbors. Now, if you're new, tell whoever is greeting you or you're greeting that you're new and you would welcome feeling welcomed. And if you're not and you've been here a while, look around. There are a goodly number of folks here today, and there's probably some people that you don't know. So seek them out and welcome them and say hello to those. Please greet one another.
morning. It's time for a story. I'm Eileen. I'm your guest preacher this morning in the month-long pulpit swap that all our Rochester area churches are doing. So in case you were wondering, Reverend Sherry is over at First Universalist downtown, and Reverend Lane May Reed from First Universalist is in my congregation in Canandaigua this morning. We're making the rounds this month. And this morning's story is called Nasruddin Feeds His Coat. It's an Islamic folk tale. And I like to tell a story with our whole bodies, so I need a little help. I need someone who is feeling like a holy fool this morning, who could play our Nasruddin. Is anybody feeling a little foolish and wants to come stand up here and say no words? Come on up, Nasruddin, the holy fool. And then we have some fancy partiers in this story. Is anybody feeling fancy and maybe in the mood to party a little bit? Just a couple. We could have one or two fancy partiers. Yeah, we've got our fancy partiers, and they're over here, preparing for a fancy party. And the story goes like this. It was Ramadan, a time of fasting in Nasruddin's community. And the people were fasting from sunup to sundown. Nothing passed their lips, no food, no water. And Nasruddin spent the days working in his fields. So he was outside working, so hungry, so thirsty in the hot sun in the middle of this fast. And now the wealthy people in town, they had invited everyone to an evening iftar, a fast-breaking meal. They invited the whole town to come to their big fancy house and break their fasts together at iftar. And so Nasruddin in his fields, so hungry, so tired, so thirsty, noticed the sun was creeping toward the horizon. And rather than go home and prepare for the party, he went straight to the iftar. He was so hungry, he was so ready, he didn't want to be late. And he showed up with his dirty clothes, with a little mud on his face and dirt under his fingernails, and the people at the party ignored him. They fed each other dates, they ate off their fancy platters, they talked with one another, they listened to the music. Nobody even said so much as hello and welcome to Nasruddin. So he sort of awkwardly wandered around the party for a little bit, popped the date in his mouth that ended his fast, and then he went home, sad and by himself. And so the next day, Nasruddin got up, fasted again. It's a month-long fast. So he worked in his fields all day. No food or water passed his lips from sun up to sundown. And once again, the wealthy people of the town prepared a party, a feast, a fast-breaking feast for the whole town. And of course, everyone was welcome to come. So they set out all their trays of foods, and they set up their fancy musicians to be ready to play. And Nasruddin noticed once again the sun starting to move toward the horizon, and he said, "Today, I'll go home first. I'll wait. I'll go home. I'll clean up." He washed his hands. He washed his face. He put on his finest coat, a coat made of silk with gold embroidery and beautiful beading. And then Nasruddin went to the party. And when he showed up, the wealthy party hosts greeted him. They said, "Hello, Nasruddin, welcome to the party." They offered him dates, and they offered him pistachios and baklava and stewed meats. And every time Nasruddin was offered a delectable treat to eat, he shoved it into the pockets of his coat. He smeared it on the shoulders and on the lapels and down the sides of this beautiful silken gold embroidered beaded coat. And the wealthy folks who hosted the party said, "Nasruddin, what are you doing? You're ruining this beautiful coat." And he said, "Yesterday, I came with my farm clothes and my dirty hands, and everyone ignored me. And today I came with my finest coat, and you greeted me and fed me, and I have to assume that all these beautiful treats are for the coat and not for me. So I'm feeding them to my coat." And the wealthy people of the town had a lot to think about that evening. And this is the end of our story. Thank you for helping me tell it. Let us join together in some shared silence, remembering, as always, that by silence we mean the grown-ups stop talking to one another so that we can listen more closely to the sounds of life, to the busy world going by outside, to the wiggles and giggles of our children, to the breath of the neighbor in the seat beside us, to the beating of our own hearts. Let's breathe in silence together. This weekend, we remember the cost of war. We remember our own complicity in the lives lost on the battlefields built on our behalf, and the lives crumbled slowly in their aftermath. I wrote this prayer a year ago, August, as our country withdrew its troops from Afghanistan in the middle of the night, and I didn't intend it to be something to share with anyone, so it feels a little vulnerable right now. But I think that I can trust you to hold it, and I think I can trust it to hold something you might need to hear said out loud. I made the mistake of watching the footage before bed, the crush of bodies screaming, crying, pushing through the Kabul airport, desperate to get the hell out of there. A flash of explosions lighting up the sky above it all. I made the mistake of wondering, where are all my childhood playmates now, who lost their legs, their hearing, their minds, there in Kabul while we were still children? Can Claire, who sat next to me in algebra, sleep tonight? Or is she also haunted by the memory of our classmate Mike, who this war took years to kill, who chose the mercy of an overdose to finally quiet the crush of bodies on his conscience? Claire was a cheerleader before the shrapnel sliced through her spine, before some other teenager's homemade IED laid her body on the altar of whatever grand purpose she was being sacrificed for. Neither of us could stomach the crush of bodies under 60 years of hard farm labor, the promise of a lifetime in the Walmart checkout line, our very own pile of rusted trash outside a rusted trailer. We needed to get the hell out of there. I went to college. She and Mike went to someone else's war. I should pray for peace, or justice maybe, something larger than my little life. But all my prayers cling to these particular children I chased through cornfields and learned to read beside, whose dreams and lives and bodies we made a desecration of. Is it like the Kabul airport in their minds tonight? Flashing, crashing, desperation, anything to get the hell out of there, and not a chance we all make it out alive. This is a remembering that is hard to hold, but this is the space where we hold it all together. So I invite you now to enter into ritual, to bring what is on our hearts and lay it on the altar of community and spirit. Honoring the complexities of life, bring to mind whatever grief, growth, or gratitude is alive within you this morning. Online, you're invited to share in the chat, and here in the sanctuary, you are invited forward to light a candle. If you would like an usher to bring a candle to you, please raise a hand, and we will. May we now share in this ritual of community care and witness to one another's hearts. All that we hold in our hearts for ourselves and for each other and for the world is held in this community and by a love that will not let us go. Amen.
I saw so much love just a little bit ago in this room. I saw people welcoming each other whose role it isn't always to help. And I just want to acknowledge that love that I saw in this room as we care for each other. And now we enter into our practice of generosity. Each week, we give to organizations outside these walls. This week, our plate collection is going to be shared with Blue, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. Blue is committed to expanding the power and capacity of Black UUs within Unitarian Universalism, providing support, information, and resources of Black Unitarians, and justice-making and liberation for Black people through our faith. In the spirit of abundance and generosity, our offering will now be received with gratitude.
As many of you know, I used to work for the Episcopal Diocese of Rochester, consulting their 50-odd churches on community outreach and growth, among other things. And there's a sign you tend to see outside Episcopal churches, almost always. They got it on t-shirts and bumper stickers and coffee mugs, and it reads, "The Episcopal Church welcomes you." And often, when asked about a church's mission or vision, their unique reason for existing and serving their community, the church leaders would tell me, well, we're welcoming. We welcome everyone, that's our mission. And I would inevitably ruin their day by requesting that they explain to me to what they wanted to welcome people. We welcome you for what? Why? Because we all know at this point that everyone in the "we welcome everyone" means even if you're gay, which in this century is not a mission statement. Like, y'all know we're also welcome at the grocery store and restaurants now, right? But it matters what they're serving. Welcome is the minimum. It matters what's on the menu. So I would annoy my beloved Episcopalians by insisting that welcome itself is not a mission statement. And I don't tell this story to highlight how silly Episcopalians are and how much better we are. I tell it because I think it applies to us too, right? We welcome everyone. That's our thing. And so does brunch. So does the park. So does sleeping in. Hell, so does St. Thomas down the street. They've got a freaking sign about it. But I believe, even if we need some practice articulating it, that we welcome people to something of substance here. We come to church because we're doing work in our community and in our world that is at least as important as brunch most days. We're holding one another's joys and sorrows in ways that sleeping in usually just doesn't compare with. We are called to wrestle not with just the needs and desires we're making space for, but also that this space is not an empty room. There is good news on the menu. So if you're here this morning, you are indeed welcome, and let's hope that's only the beginning, right? So let's start with a non-rhetorical question. You can shout out your answer. Do you want this church to grow? Yes. I thought so. Okay, a rhetorical but entirely genuine question. You can just reflect on your answer for a second. Why? I did not grow up in evangelical religious traditions. And I don't just mean capital E American evangelical Christianity. I mean traditions where insiders are meant to spread the good news to outsiders, where recruitment or growth was a goal. We didn't really think about being welcoming to new members, let alone going out to find them, inviting them in. New members were born in, not brought in. For Catholics, salvation is much more dependent on behavior than belief, so there's little impetus to bring individuals into a religious community. There's, of course, another whole story about incorporating societal power structures into institutional Catholicism, but that's a different sermon. For Jewish communities, there's almost zero emphasis on growth or incorporation of new members. There's even a tradition of denying potential converts multiple times to make sure they're really sure. In fact, there are few world religions devoted to the idea of growth and expansion of their membership in the way that Protestant Christian groups and their descendants tend to be. Even when we're bad at growth, because WASPy values say you should never share deeply about something that's meaningful to you, or maybe because we don't actually believe that our particular good news is essential to anybody's salvation, we care about growth on principle, right? Our churches may be shrinking year after year, but the goal is growth. Y'all are hiring a minister for growth next year. I myself have stood in this pulpit as your membership coordinator and said to you, healthy living things grow. If we're not growing, we're dying. But why? Why do we want to grow? The pragmatists among us will say we need growth to survive. We need more members to balance our deficit budget. It's UU Roadshow month. This month, I'm preaching this sermon in 3 congregations, and I know that the balance our budget concern is going to land in all 3 places. You're not alone, but that's a different sermon. And anyway, bad news on that front. New membership growth almost never means new fiscal growth. Membership growth costs money. Longevity balances a budget. People who've been in the world long enough to build some personal financial stability and been in the church long enough to be really, really committed to it, especially in a faith like ours. So, non-rhetorical question you can answer by a show of hands. How many of you were raised Unitarian Universalist? And how many of us came to this faith as adults? Yeah. We're in a tradition that's centuries old, where some 80% of our movement are converts. We're actually really good at getting people in the door, kind of terrible at keeping them. And I don't know, maybe that's partly because we treat them like their purpose in being with us is to help pay our bills. I'm just saying. I'm still not sold on the why. Why do we want people in the door and to stay? Some of my more sentimental friends are out here thinking because we want this place to exist after we're gone. We have to grow at least the same rate we're dying if this community is going to last. To which, annoyingly, I admit, I say, why? Why do we want it to last? And I know these questions are exasperating. I just don't think we should take for granted that growth is our goal without examining why. I'll tell you a secret that maybe you already have guessed. I don't really care if the church grows. Not on my best days. Now, I'm not too proud to admit that in my most desperate, ego-driven moments, I sit up in bed at night and I say, Brian, I really think I could grow my church. But at my best, at my spiritual core, even when I say healthy living things grow, I do not feel invested in the growth of this church, this denomination, this movement. Growth is a side effect of health, not its purpose. What I care about is that every person here can not just articulate but embody the good news of Unitarian Universalism. This is, in fact, the work that your new Reverend Vertus is called to, expanding our vision of Unitarian Universalism, helping the people already in these seats live out loud the good news of this faith. And what, you may be asking, the hell is that? Because let's not kid ourselves, we bury it pretty deep, right? It can be far too easy to think of our faith like an empty room, in which case, welcome is the only thing we have to offer. Y'all come, just bring whatever you have, and every belief fits, everybody's welcome. This is not, even if we really fail to grow our membership, an empty room. There is good news at the heart of what we are doing here, even if we struggle to name it. So I think let's struggle a little bit this morning, yeah? I don't know what I was going to do if you said no, but... James Luther Adams, nerd alert. James Luther Adams was a Unitarian minister and theologian in the early to mid 20th century who wrestled with the question of the foundations of faith, and his wrestling is maybe a good starting place for ours. I wouldn't end there, but we can start there. Reverend Adams wrote about what he called the 5 smooth stones of liberal religion. This is in reaction to the 5 rough stones of Christianity. It's a David and Goliath thing. That's another sermon. Sounds boring. I'm not going to preach it. Adams's smooth stones were, first of all, our faith depends on the principle that revelation is continuous. He meant that our religious tradition is a living tradition because we always are learning new truths. There is not in Unitarian Universalism the idea that our spiritual wisdom is limited to a certain source that has been fully revealed and understood. We learned in his lifetime the original Hebrew of the Jewish Bible and what the inside of an atom looked like. And he felt like that should change a person spiritually. Second, he said all relations between persons ought ideally to rest on mutual free consent and not on coercion. I don't know if he spoke like this, but that's how I imagine it. What he means is it's foundational to our faith that we freely choose to enter into relationship with one another. This is the smooth stone I like to call it's not a cult, no matter how weird the solstice service gets. There is no punishment, community, or divine for those who choose not to be part of this thing. There is no shunning when people leave. Our congregations are not obligated to a higher authority than their people. We join together freely. We come together by way of covenants we freely make with one another, and we come back together that way when we mess up. Third, the core of our religion affirms the moral obligation to direct one's own effort toward the establishment of a just and loving community. Ours is a faith that demands we work toward liberation. We work at being together not just in free association, but in love and in justice. We make no room for beliefs that encourage us to ignore the marginalized or deeper disconnections between people. This is the stone I have nicknamed, it's not a freaking country club. See also the reason no one's inviting me to write the official theological history of Unitarian Universalism. Fourth, we deny the immaculate conception of virtue and affirm the necessity of social incarnation. This smooth stone is about agency. Good things don't just happen, we've got to make them happen. Our beliefs require us to be part of our own liberation. There may or may not be a God in our personal beliefs, but there is not one who works alone to move the world toward justice. Our collective work is required for this. And finally, Adams looked around and decided that what he saw in the world should justify an attitude of ultimate optimism. We are a people of hope. This is the good part of the good news. There is no irrevocably fallen world. We may not see the restoration of every broken promise or the reparation of every harm, but the belief that repair and healing are possible, that's something we hold at our center. And still, it's too complicated, right? We haven't landed on it. Like if you're out there defying your waspy heritage, not to make assumptions, sharing with a friend how community has deeply transformed your life, has saved you, I just don't imagine it going like this. Friend, the good news of my faith is that, well, nerd alert, James Luther Adams was a Unitarian theologian in the early 20th century. Like that can't be it, right? But it does. We're starting to see that the room is not empty. Like there's at least 5 rocks in here, yeah? And it's not that I think we should be able to condense the nuance and the depth of our faith into a cute bumper sticker. I'm not looking for the UU version of a John 3:16 t-shirt. I also don't think John 3:16 is a great summary of the beauty and joy of Christian theology, but that's a different sermon, probably for a different church. We have a rich and complex theological foundation, and just to be clear, I'm not interested in dumbing any of that down. But I do think there is a center to it. And without a good understanding of what we hold at the center, we will continue to think of ourselves as an empty room into which a sad welcome is the only gift we have to offer the world. We are more than that, friends. Springing forward about 100 years from the smooth stones, we're right now in the process as a denomination of amending Article 2 of our bylaws. And for those of you thinking, oh my God, we just sat through a lecture on what's his name, how much more boring is this gonna get? I promise it's not as boring as it sounds. Article 2 of our bylaws is what holds, among other things, the language of our principles. The UUA appointed a commission to study the entirety of Article 2 to ask, as we are asking this morning, to what are we welcoming people? And are we actually any good at it? And also why, and if necessary, rewrite the whole thing, which they have done. Where they are leading us is to call ourselves a faith with love at its center. Let me read you just a tiny taste of what they have distilled. Love is the enduring force that holds us together. Love inspires and powers the passion with which we embody our values. Inseparable from one another, These shared values are justice, generosity, pluralism, transformation, equity, and interdependence. That feels, honestly, a little bit smoother than the Stones, yeah? Love at our center, to me, looks like belonging. In fact, I think our sometimes unfortunate habit of telling the good news of our faith by reminding everyone of what we are not a people of creeds, not a group that believe all the same things about God or humanity or healing or wholeness, not communities beholden to some authority beyond our own. I think this is a way of making room for what we are. Because here's the thing I know for sure. None of us come to church because of who we are not. Those things we know not to be true will not carry us through any kind of storm. All of the nots, I think, are just a way of holding belief at bay to make room for belonging. I believe it's not an empty welcome, but a deep and meaningful, purpose-filled belonging that is the good news of our faith. We recite the knots, we reject all those restrictions on belief because for us, the much deeper ground of our belonging, of our understanding is our belonging. So anything that cuts us off from belonging must be held at bay. We hold on to covenants, those promises we make in free consent to one another rather than creeds because what we know for certain is just that we belong to one another. I took a deep breath and shared that prayer with you earlier because I would like the good news of our belonging to one another, our belonging to particular, specific, real others, not just an imagined ideal of humanity, to work its way into our hearts this Memorial Day and refuse to let us go. Because it's only in the absence of this bone-deep belonging that we can conceive of something as heinous as war. Something as unspeakable as sending our most vulnerable children across the world to harm someone else's. And the beauty of this good news is that the truly solid bedrock of our faith doesn't live in books or some heavenly other realm. It lives in our bodies. It lives in the earth, in the literal bedrock. I don't think we can separate any of our theology, however loftily we compose it, from the particular bit of earth that made us. And I have not learned, in ministry, in books, in seminary, in 1,000 Sundays in the pew beside you good people, how to sum up the good news any better than this. I belong to the body of the earth, to that which made me. All of us do, which must mean, I hope, that we belong to one another. And that makes our question of to what do we welcome folks and why land quite differently, right? The good news of belonging changes the shape of our welcome. It cannot simply mean that we include others in the circle of what we already do and how we do it, but that our welcome of others is a transformation of ourselves. Welcome isn't a value unto itself. It is a willingness for the sake of our inherent belonging to meet others where they are and be changed by them. One of the oldest Bible stories that we tell is about this kind of welcome. Abraham, the story goes, lived long, long ago in a land called Canaan. He was a nomad, traveling from place to place with his big household and his herds of animals. They had no permanent home, so they brought their tents with them wherever they traveled. It was a dangerous and vulnerable life to be nomads. They were high risks for thieves and criminals. They didn't have a long-term community, so it was hard to know who to trust. Everyone was a stranger, and anyone might be dangerous. So one day, the story goes, Abraham was sitting outside his tent, resting after a long day of work, probably, when he saw some strangers approaching way out in the distance. He didn't run or hide or prepare to defend his household. He didn't even wait to welcome them if they ever showed up at his door. He got up from his seat, he went out into the field to meet those strangers, and then he walked with them. And when they got back to his tent, He offered to wash the dirt off their feet and to feed them. "Stay with us for the night," he asked, without asking who they were. Quite some time after taking care of the strangers, Abraham realized they were his God in disguise. He chose the kind of welcome rooted in the good news of deep belonging, of an interdependence that is written into our being. He chose to widen his small circle and to be changed by that. He chose not to wait for those strangers to come to him, but to go to where they were and walk with them. And when he did, he met divinity itself. It's not my goal for this church to grow, for my church to grow, for any of our churches to grow, any more than it was Abraham's goal to grow his household by bringing in strangers. I don't care if we grow. I care whether you hold the good news of this faith so deeply in your bones that you could never forget it. You belong. So does everyone else. We belong to one another, to this earth that made us, to that spirit of love that called us into being and lives at our center. Growth is just a side effect of our willingness to be transformed by that. Just a side effect of a faith so good, so joyful, that we can't help but live it out loud. We belong. May it be so. Amen. I want to invite you to rise in your bodies or your spirits here or at home and sing our closing hymn together. The hymn is Draw the Circle Wide, and it's not in our hymnals, but it is on the screen in front of us and the screen on Zoom. Sing and dance together.
After service, let us draw the circle wide by joining with one another for coffee and conversation and perhaps some discussion about our sermon. And if you are a parent of a Black, Indigenous, or people of color child, whether they be small or all grown up, you are welcome to join other parents in the Susan B. Anthony Lounge for time and connection together.
Will you join me in the chalice extinguishing words? I took my microphone off too early. I'm sorry, Emily. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And let us hold as a benediction the words from that great prophet, Pat Benatar. Whatever we deny or embrace, for worse or for better, we belong. We belong, we belong, we belong together. Amen.